9 Black R&B, legends who were actually prostitutes men. What if the smooth voices that define romance were actually hiding a dark transactional secret? At Black Excellence, legends were stripping away the velvet curtain to reveal a staggering truth for many R&B icons. The road to the charts ran through the shadows of the companion industry. From Marvin Gaye to Rick James, these weren't just artists. They were survivors who sold intimacy to fund their immortality. Was this the ultimate hustle or a tragic price for fame? Watch until the end to see the industry's darkest trade, and don't forget to subscribe to uncover the untold history of our greatest stars. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye remains the quintessential soul searcher, a man whose voice could bridge the gap between divine spiritualism and earthly desire. However, before the world hailed him as the Prince of Motown, Marvin was a man adrift in the unforgiving landscape of late 1960s Los Angeles. Having fled the rigid structures of Detroit after a series of personal and professional setbacks, he arrived in the City of Angels with a golden throat but empty pockets. The industry at that time was a predatory machine, and for a young black man without a powerful benefactor, survival often necessitated navigating the invisible economy of high society companionship. The narrative of Marvin's early LA years is shaded by accounts of private appointments with wealthy, influential patrons. These were not mere fans seeking an autograph. They were individuals purchasing the presence of a man who exuded an effortless, magnetic sensuality. Witnesses from the era recall a younger guy, often dressed in a singular worn-out suit, appearing at exclusive penthouses where the air was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and cigarette smoke. In these hushed rooms, he wasn't a chart-topping icon. He was a commodity. These transactions provided the essential bridge between homelessness and the studio time that would eventually produce his masterpieces. The tragedy of Marvin's journey lies in the stark contrast between his public persona and his private reality. While he stood before microphones singing about the liberation of sexual healing, his own history with intimacy was deeply fractured by these early transactional years. He learned to weaponize his charm to secure rent money, a survival tactic that left deep psychological scars. This power imbalance, where wealthy elites held the keys to his physical survival, is reflected in the haunting melancholic undertones of his greatest works. He didn't just sing about love. He sang about the desperation of someone who knew exactly what it felt like to sell pieces of his soul to keep his dreams alive. Ultimately, the legend of Marvin Gaye is built upon a foundation of both transcendent talent and the gritty, unspoken sacrifices made in the shadows of Hollywood's neon lights. Rick James. Long before Rick James became the flamboyant king of punk funk, he was a nomadic musician drifting through the global underground from the streets of Toronto to the high-stakes hills of California. Unlike many of his peers who entered the industry through traditional church choirs, Rick's education was forged in the fires of the counterculture and the decadent parties of the wealthy elite. In the mid-1970s, as he struggled to secure a definitive record contract, James discovered that his most liquid asset wasn't just his bass guitar, but his unapologetic raw animal magnetism. He navigated a world where making it often meant entertaining the very people who controlled the gates of Hollywood, sometimes in ways that went far beyond musical performance. The archives of the disco era are peppered with accounts of Rick James as a fixture at exclusive Beverly Hills salon parties. These gatherings were clandestine playgrounds for the powerful, and Rick, with his braided hair, defiant gaze, and electric energy, was a prized guest. However, this proximity came with an unwritten price tag. Inside these mansions where champagne flowed like water and the music never stopped, Rick often functioned as a high-end companion, providing vibe and intimacy for affluent hosts who wanted a taste of the rebellious spirit he embodied. These weren't mere social calls. They were calculated maneuvers. He understood that in a world built on transactions, his body and his time were currency used to buy the connections, studio gear, and influence necessary to launch his eventual takeover with Motown. What separated Rick James from the others was his refusal to retreat into shame. He didn't just participate in this transactional lifestyle, he absorbed its decadence into his artistic DNA. The lyrics of "Give It To Me, Baby" and "Super Freak" weren't just catchy hooks. They were echoes of a man who had lived through the gritty reality of being a dessert on a VIP menu. He viewed himself as a master negotiator who played the system to his advantage. A fellow musician from that era once remarked that Rick would emerge from dawn-lit parties with pockets stuffed with cash and a brand new melody already on his lips. This survival of the flyest mentality allowed him to climb the ladder of a ruthless industry, turning his past as a companion into the very fuel that powered his explosive, world-dominating stage persona. To understand the genius of Rick James is to acknowledge that his crown was forged in the heat of these secret nights, where he traded his presence for the power to eventually command the world. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass remains the ultimate architect of the R&B seduction anthem, a man whose baritone could growl with raw masculinity or whisper with tender vulnerability. Yet before he became the solo titan of Philadelphia International Records, Teddy occupied a much humbler space, the drum throne for Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. Sitting in the back, shrouded in rhythm and sweat, Teddy watched the mechanics of fame from a distance. In the early 1970s, as the group struggled to maintain its footing in a volatile industry, Teddy realized that his towering stature and smoldering physical appeal were assets that could be leveraged long before his voice ever touched a lead microphone. Behind the polished veneer of the Philly soul, sound rumors circulated about Teddy's private clientele. In an era where black musicians were often underpaid and exploited by labels, survival required a multifaceted hustle. Industry insiders and former studio managers hinted at a period where Teddy acted as an elite companion for wealthy, influential patrons who were enamored with his rugged charm. These weren't public appearances. They were discreet, high-stakes arrangements conducted in the shadows of the city's most exclusive social circles. For Teddy, these transactions weren't about vanity. They were about the cold necessity of paying bills and maintaining a presence in rooms where power resided. He understood that to get to the front of the stage, he had to survive the nights spent in the company of those who viewed him as an exotic prize. The fascinating element of Teddy's story is how this private history eventually informed his public persona. When he finally stepped into the spotlight, his performance style was imbued with an intimacy that felt almost dangerously real. He didn't just sing to women. He addressed them with the knowing confidence of a man who had already navigated the most private of chambers. His women-only concerts, legendary events, where he would perform for female-only audiences, were a masterful rebranding of his history with companionship. He took the velvet deals of his youth and transformed them into a multi-million-dollar image of the ultimate lover. Teddy Pendergrass never confirmed the whispers of his past, but the sheer gravity of his sensuality suggested a man who had learned the value of intimacy as a currency long before he sold it to the world through a gold record. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross was the undisputed master of the love song, a perfectionist whose voice was as smooth as expensive silk and as precise as a diamond cutter. Yet behind the velvet voice that soundtracked a million weddings, there existed a fortress of privacy that few were ever allowed to breach. In the late 1970s and early 80s, before Luther ascended to the throne of solo superstardom, he was the industry's most coveted background singer and jingle creator. However, the path to the front of the stage was prohibitively expensive and politically treacherous for a black artist who didn't fit the traditional tough guy mold. During these formative years, whispers began to circulate within the high-end recording studios of New York City about Luther's role as a charming companion for the industry's elite. In the upper echelons of the music business, power is often brokered in private dining rooms and exclusive late-night lounges. Luther, with his impeccable tailoring, sophisticated wit, and aura of refined elegance, became a sought-after presence at these closed-door gatherings. The rumor widely discussed among sound technicians and session musicians was that Luther engaged in social arrangements with wealthy benefactors and powerful executives. These were not crude street transactions. They were sophisticated exchanges of time and companionship. In return for his presence as a graceful world-class companion at elite functions, Luther allegedly received the financial backing and industry protection necessary to launch a solo career that required massive capital. For Luther, these arrangements were likely a strategic necessity, a way to build a financial war chest in an era when labels were notoriously stingy with new R&B acts. The poignancy of Luther's career lies in the profound loneliness that often echoed through his most romantic ballads. When he sang "A House Is Not a Home," there was a depth of yearning that felt earned, perhaps born from a life where intimacy was often a professional contract rather than a personal sanctuary. He guarded his private life with a ferocity that was legendary, never confirming a single detail about his romantic partners or his past arrangements. This silence became his shield. He transformed the private deals of his early years into a public image of universal, unattainable romance. By keeping the world out, he allowed every listener to feel that he was singing only to them. Luther Vandross proved that in the ruthless world of entertainment, silence isn't just golden, it is a survival mechanism that allows a legend to keep a piece of his soul for himself. Billy Preston. Billy Preston was a force of nature, a keyboard virtuoso who could infuse a rock song with the fire of a gospel revival. Famously known as the Fifth Beatle, he was the only musician ever credited alongside the Fab Four on a single. However, the path to the top of the charts began in the dim, neon-lit alleys of 1950s and 60s Los Angeles. Long before he was a global icon, Billy was a young black man navigating a city that offered very few legitimate avenues for wealth. While his talent was undeniable, the rent was relentless. During these lean years, a persistent narrative emerged from the local jazz and R&B scene. Billy Preston was a master of the private gig, a term that carried a heavy double meaning in the high-stakes world of Hollywood. The stories from Billy's early LA days describe a young man with a weary gaze and a world-class smile who frequently accepted invitations to the homes of wealthy older patrons. These were not concerts in the traditional sense. They were intimate, closed-door encounters where the Hammond organ often provided nothing more than a soft, rhythmic backdrop for long nights of companionship. In a city where access to power was everything, Billy's ability to make the influential feel important became his primary survival tool. These appointments were reportedly rewarded with silent envelopes, thick bundles of cash slid across mahogany tables that allowed him to maintain the lifestyle and equipment necessary to keep his musical dreams afloat. For Billy, the piano keys were his passport, but his presence was the currency he traded for a seat at the table. What makes Billy Preston's story so compelling is the contrast between his exuberant stage presence and the internal conflict he reportedly carried. He spent his career in the service of giants, Ray Charles, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, always the smiling genius in the background. Yet those who knew him in the early days wondered if that radiant smile had been perfected during the years he had to please others just to stay off the streets. His music often felt like an escape, a joyous explosion of sound meant to drown out the memory of murky agreements made in the shadows. Billy Preston eventually reached a place where he no longer needed the envelopes, but the grit of those early years remained in his playstyle, a soulful, desperate energy that reminded everyone that even a legend sometimes has to dance in the dark before they can step into the light. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack was the quintessential musician's musician, a man whose voice was a jagged landscape of grit, honey, and hard-earned wisdom. He was the soulful architect behind hits for the Rolling Stones and Sam Cooke, but his own journey was far from a straight line to the top. Born into the brutal poverty of Cleveland and later finding himself adrift in the shark-infested waters of the music industry, Womack learned early on that a black artist's survival often required more than just a mastery of the fretboard. In the lean years before his solo career ignited as he struggled to establish his identity in a world that saw him only as a songwriter or a sideman, Bobby allegedly engaged in a clandestine world of private engagements to keep the lights on. Backstage whispers from the 1960s soul circuit paint a picture of Womack as a man who understood the high value of his own magnetism. In an era where recording contracts were often exploitative, many artists turned to the shadow stage, private high society gatherings where wealthy patrons paid for the exclusive company of the era's most soulful figures. In these dimly lit rooms, where the air was heavy with the scent of expensive cigars and vintage wine, Bobby didn't just play the guitar. He provided an atmosphere of intimacy and rebellion for an elite audience that wanted to touch the real soul experience. These transactions were often the only way a young artist from the projects could afford to stay in the city, buy a decent suit, and maintain the instruments necessary to craft the hits that would eventually define a generation. For Bobby, every private performance was a calculated step toward a future where he would no longer have to be available for a price. The brilliance of Bobby Womack lies in how he infused this transactional reality into the very marrow of his music. When you listen to the desperation in If You Think You're Lonely Now, or the raw vulnerability of That's the Way I Feel About Chow, you aren't just hearing a performance, you are hearing the echo of those long private nights. He sang like a man who had seen the bottom of the glass and the back of the closed door. He never apologized for his hustle or the complex path he took to reach the spotlight. Instead, he wore his past like a suit of armor, turning the special appointments and survival tactics of his youth into a legendary aura of streetwise authenticity. Bobby Womack's legacy is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful soul music is born from the most uncomfortable compromises made in the dark. Johnny Gill. Johnny Gill entered the R&B pantheon with a voice that felt like a force of nature, a deep, resonant baritone that could command a stadium. However, his transition from a promising young talent to a centerpiece of the legendary group New Edition was shrouded in industry whispers. In the late 1980s, the music business was a labyrinth of power dynamics, where a talent was often secondary to who you knew and whose company you kept. For a young singer like Johnny, stepping into a pre-established empire meant navigating not just recording booths, but also the elite social circles of the men who funded the industry. During this pivotal era, rumors persisted that Johnny's swift ascent was supported by his role as an elegant, high-profile companion for powerful, wealthy men in the entertainment and business worlds. The narrative surrounding Johnny's early years is marked by his frequent presence at exclusive invitation-only gatherings, where cameras were strictly forbidden. Unlike the street-level hustle of previous generations, Johnny's arrangements were reportedly much more sophisticated, a blend of mentorship and high-society companionship. Observers from the era noted that his appearances at luxury retreats and private parties weren't merely social, they were strategic alignments. In these closed-off spaces, the value of a young, charismatic Black artist's presence was immense. These associations allegedly provided the financial security and the political muscle needed to ensure his solo career flourished alongside his work with the group. For Johnny, the game wasn't about surviving poverty, but about securing a seat at the highest table of power in an industry notorious for discarding artists as quickly as it found them. The intrigue of Johnny Gill's story lies in the grown-up aura he brought to his music. When he released ballads like My, he didn't sound like a typical boy band member. He sounded like a man with a secret history. His silence regarding the rumors of his private life only fueled the legend. He chose to communicate through his artistry, using a vocal style that suggested a depth of experience far beyond his years. Experiences that some believe were forged in the long, quiet nights spent in the company of the elite. Johnny Gill walked through the fire of industry gossip with his head held high, proving that in the world of R&B, a secret shared with the powerful can be the strongest foundation for a lasting legacy. He transformed the whispers of his past into a cloak of mystery that made his music feel even more vital and adult. Billy Paul. Billy Paul was the voice of jazz-infused soul, a man whose style was defined by a cerebral elegance and a vocal texture that felt like aged mahogany. While he is forever immortalized for his 1972 classic, Me and Mrs. Jones, the years leading up to that monumental success were spent in the complex shadows of Philadelphia's nightlife. Long before the gold records, Billy was a struggling jazz singer navigating a segregated and financially tight industry. In the Philadelphia of the late 50s and 60s, a Black artist with Billy's level of refinement was a rare find. And it wasn't long before he caught the attention of a very specific demographic, wealthy, influential women of high society who desired more than just a song. The whispers surrounding Billy's pre-fame years describe a sophisticated arrangement that allowed him to keep his musical ambitions alive while living in luxury. Veterans of the Philly DJ scene often recalled how Billy was kept by a circle of affluent socialites who valued his impeccable charm and discreet companionship. These were not public affairs, but a series of private upscale appointments where Billy's voice was the prelude to long evenings spent in the company of the city's elite. He was frequently seen arriving at small exclusive clubs in chauffeur-driven cars, only to disappear after midnight into the private residences of his patrons. These relationships provided the financial oxygen he needed to sustain his craft in a city that often suffocated young talent. For Billy, this wasn't just a side job. It was a survival strategy that allowed him to maintain the class his brand would eventually be built upon. The true irony of Billy Paul's career is that his greatest hit, Me and Mrs. Jones, was essentially a public confession of the life he had lived in private. When he sang about meeting every day at the same cafe and the pain of a secret love that we both know it's wrong, he wasn't just performing a lyric, he was channeling the lived reality of those clandestine years. The song resonated so deeply because it was fueled by the genuine melancholy of a man who understood the weight of a relationship that can never see the light of day. Billy Paul never felt the need to explain the rumors of his past. Instead, he let the mystery of his life blend into the fabric of his music, creating an aura of forbidden romance that made him an icon. He proved that sometimes the most successful songs are the ones that tell the secrets we've been keeping for years. Fillmore Slim. Fillmore Slim stands alone in the history of R&B and blues as a man who never asked for forgiveness and never hid in the shadows of rumors. Born Clarence Sims, he became a legend of the West Coast, not just for his searing guitar licks, but for his dual life as the Pope of Pimping. While other artists on this list navigated discreet arrangements to survive the industry, Slim operated in the open air of San Francisco's Fillmore district. In the 1960s and 70s, he was a flamboyant king of the asphalt, managing an extensive network of companions while simultaneously sharing the stage with icons like B.B. King and Etta James. For Slim, the streets and the stage were two sides of the same coin. Both required a master's understanding of human desire and the art of the hustle. The narrative of Fillmore Slim is one of raw honesty. He didn't view his history in the companion industry as a dark secret to be buried under record deals. Instead, he treated it as a legitimate education in the school of life. On the neon-lit boulevards of San Francisco, Slim learned how to read a room, how to dress with lethal precision, and how to command attention before he even struck a chord. He famously admitted that the money he made from his street dealings funded his musical equipment and kept his band on the road during the lean years when labels refused to sign black bluesmen. He was a master of the long game, using his street-earned capital to buy his way into the very rooms where he would eventually be hailed as a musical pioneer. The brilliance of Fillmore Slim's later career is the absolute authenticity of his sound. When you hear him play the blues, you aren't hearing a sanitized version of the struggle. You are hearing the grit of a man who lived every lyric. He didn't romanticize the life, but he didn't run from it either, famously appearing in the documentary American Pimp to discuss his past with the same charisma he brought to his Fender Stratocaster. He proved that the survivor mentality of the R&B legend doesn't always have to be whispers and shadows. By turning his dark street nights into a transparent part of his legacy, Fillmore Slim became the ultimate symbol of the R&B hustle. He was a man who lived 1,000 lives, proving that you can walk through the gutter and still reach the stars as long as you never lose your rhythm or your pride. The stories of these 9 icons reveal a haunting duality within the R&B industry, where the black excellence we celebrate was often forged in the fires of desperate compromise. From Marvin Gaye's quiet arrangements to Fillmore Slim's open defiance, these legends traded pieces of their private selves for the chance at a public voice. At Black Excellence Legends, we believe their genius remains untarnished, but the cost of their immortality was undeniably high. This begs the ultimate question: should we view these transactional pasts as a stain on their legacies, or as the ultimate testament to their survival and resilience?